Your number is 877-217-5757. We look forward to hearing from you as always. And Governor Edwards is in the House. Much is happening. A legislative session is in the offing, and much is percolating at the Capitol, as they say. Again, 877-217-5757. And the session has to end on June 8th by law at 6 p.m. And we also want to thank, before we go to the governor, Jerry Mayer of Hometown Productions, has been with us since day one when we started in April of 2016, and with us for every show. And this program is not only heard, but seen in many places in Louisiana, thanks to Jerry Mayer and Hometown Productions. Governor Edwards, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jim. It's great to be back with you.
Nice to talk with you. Well, I see all these headlines like Edwards blasts House GOP on budget. And as we know, things are moving around, and the House does one thing and the Senate does another, and ultimately they have to come to some sort of an agreement. How's it looking as we approach June 8th?
Well, first of all, I remain very optimistic that we are going to produce a good budget for the state, both as it relates to the operating budget for next fiscal year, but we have additional funds to supplement the appropriations that have already been made for the current year. And we can make the investments. And when I talk to people all across the state, it doesn't matter whether they're Democrats, Independents, Republicans. They believe we need to invest more in roads and bridges and infrastructure, coastal projects, things like that. They also believe that we need to invest in education, and that's what formed the basis of our budget proposals. We still remain committed and believe we will get a pay raise for teachers. I've asked for $3,000 increase for teachers, half of that for support workers. But we also have to invest in early childhood education, especially to make up for the loss of federal stimulus dollars, so that we don't lose the number of seats that we actually have for our youngest learners. And then higher ed as well. You see all the news about critical shortages in areas like nursing, but we also know we have it in teachers and other areas. Well, we've got a strategic plan to address those acute needs, but they all require funding. And I'll also tell you, Jim, you mentioned about the headline in the paper from my press conference this last Thursday. I think if you read the article, you will see that I was being rather factual, but you know, newspapers like to have a pretty bold headline to grab people's attention. Because I really don't think I was blasting anyone. I was trying to explain what the House did and didn't do with our budget, but I expressed optimism even then that the Senate would make the critical investments that we need to make.
Well, in the story, Commissioner of Administration Jay Darden is quoted as saying that the debt payoff plan is like paying down a mortgage of a house before repairing holes in the roof. That's a pretty good analogy, isn't it?
Well, it is, but you got to understand, we're making payments. There's no administration in the history of our state that has made more payments to the unfunded accrued liability than mine. 10% of every surplus, for example, by law goes there, and we run a surplus every single year. But the programmed payments into the unfunded accrued liability of our pension systems were also the highest during my administration. So that initial unfunded accrued liability is going to be completely extinguished by 2029. The plan that the House has, by the way, there's nothing wrong with putting money towards the IUAL. Under the current circumstances, does it make sense? Given all the pressing needs we have with infrastructure, and if you fund those infrastructure projects with cash, you avoid the inflationary increases going forward. And so that's what we believe that the best use of the funding is. We're hoping to convince the Senate, and by the way, still working with the House to make sure that we have a reasonable budget. Jim, there's no reason not to get a good budget for the state of Louisiana. Revenue is up well above the forecast precisely because the economy has grown. It has been diversified. We have the lowest unemployment ever measured in the month of March. We'll get April numbers Friday. I suspect they'll be about the same, the lowest ever measured in April of any year. We have the most people working. We have the highest personal income From a fiscal situation, the ship has been righted. We had $400 million in the bank and a $2 billion deficit when I became governor. Now we have more than $2 billion in the bank and a balanced budget with the opportunity to make really significant, crucial investments in roads and in bridges and in coastal projects. You name it. So the idea that we can't get a budget, I just don't believe it. We're going to get a good budget for the people of Louisiana, and we're going to do it by June the 8th. You
think you will get teacher pay hikes?
Yes. I think there's a clear, substantial majority in the legislature that wants teacher pay. The proposal that was in the House quite simply won't work. You can't give a permanent raise on a temporary savings. And that, if you just boiled it down, that's what was being proposed.
But minimum wage, again, it didn't get out of the House committee.
Isn't that sad? $7.25. So the House of Representatives has decided that $7.25 is an adequate floor on the wages that working men and women can earn in Louisiana, and a huge majority of the people of Louisiana believe that is abusively low, and for whatever reason, once again, they've decided they don't want to increase that and express any support for working people. I think that's a shame. Now, the good news is virtually nobody's working for $7.25, but that also means it's a wonderful time to increase the minimum wage, right? Yeah. But unfortunately, that's not what's going to happen this year.
Lawmakers did decide after clearing one round that it wasn't such a good idea to raise their own pay, and you have been an advocate of that. You thought it's been the same since 1980.
Well, that's true, and it really is kind of the similar analysis to the minimum wage, and by the way, similar analysis to teacher pay, too. The pay for a legislator is $16,800. That has been since 1980, and quite frankly, on occasion, that pay needs to be increased. Otherwise, you make it where you cannot get many people who would want to serve and would be great at it that can't afford to come to Baton Rouge for that.
Ask the governor.
All right, let's pot that down. That's not the right break for our show. 877-217-5757 is your number. You're listening to Ask the Governor on your station. LaDonna in Arkansas, good afternoon. You are on Ask the Governor.
Good afternoon.
Yes, LaDonna. Where in Arkansas are you, by the way?
I'm calling from Marshall, Arkansas. I'm a dual residency of Louisiana. All my family's from Louisiana. I wanted to ask Governor Edwards about the medical needy in the correctional facilities of all inmates. My son is a prime example. He's been 18 years out of a 25-year sentence. And he is in fifth-stage renal failure and congestive heart failure. He got his legs broken by a guard on 4/30th, and took him 12 hours before they got him to the hospital.
All right. Thank you, LaDonna. Governor?
Yeah. So, first of all, LaDonna, thank you very much for calling. I believe Jim is a native of Arkansas, or spent some time in Arkansas.
Okay. A lot of time. But.
Got it. And I apologize. I didn't get what the question was. But before you get off the phone, LaDonna, and maybe you've already done it, Hannah is able to take your number so that we can get back in touch with you. I didn't know whether you were asking about the possibility of some sort of a medical parole, and it would depend upon the exact nature of the physical condition, the illness that you just mentioned, and how progressed it is, and as well as I believe what crime may have been committed, if that was the question. But I can get someone to get back in touch with you and find out what that question was or what the issue was, and try to get it resolved for you.
Thank you, LaDonna. Cynthia and Zachary, good afternoon, Cynthia. You're on the air.
Hi, and hello, Governor. Hello, Jim. I was glad to hear you mention the increase in revenue and surpluses and such. My question is, when can we get the state capitol building bathed? It looks like an old, tired, mildewed, I don't know what, sticking up in the middle of Baton Rouge.
Yeah, well, thank you, Cynthia.
It looks great at night. But during the day, I'm with you.
Yeah, and part of it has been cleaned, and part of it hasn't, and because of the scaffolding that is required, that is extensive, and I guess that's a function of two things: is we have the highest state capitol, the tallest in the United States, and we made it out of a material that I think darkens over time, and just looks like it needs to be cleaned with some regularity. But all of that is expensive, but that has happened to at least part of the building, and then I'll have to find out whether the remainder of it is under contract or whether there's a project that is going to start. And by the way, it's not just on occasion cleaning it. When we had our inauguration this last time, there had to be a temporary shelter put over the front doors because you had bits and pieces of the building that were actually falling on occasion, and they didn't want anyone to be hurt by that. So there's more than just cleaning that has to happen, but actual maintenance and restoration of that beautiful building as well. But Cynthia, I love the Capitol too, and I want it to look its best. I am not sure, as I sit here today, what the next phase is on that project.
877-217-5757 for Governor John Bel Edwards on Ask the Governor. Rick in New Orleans. Hello, Rick.
Yes, how you doing?
Fine.
What the next phase is on that project.
All right. Turn.
Yeah, here's the thing. I'm concerned about the fact that, as we know, Katrina knocked out Amtrak passenger rail service from Baton Rouge all the way to Jacksonville. When are we going to get taken care of that?
All right. What about passenger rail? I know there is something that is prospective between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, but how about other parts of the state?
Yeah, well, first of all, Rick, you should be happy to know that we have had lots of meetings with the folks at Amtrak, with the folks at Canadian Pacific who just merged with Kansas City Southern, and with folks at the National Transportation Safety Board. And that all are in agreement that a restoration of passenger rail between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, but also connecting on to Mobile and points eastward, is something that we're working towards. We have applied for grants under the bipartisan infrastructure law for the money necessary to upgrade the infrastructure to make that feasible, especially a replacement of the bridge over the Bonnet Carré Spillway, which is very expensive. But until that happens, there's a very low speed limit on any train, passenger or freight, which would probably inhibit, at least to some degree, the people who would be willing to ride it. But we are getting very close, and I don't have an exact timeline for you, but it's something that has been a priority of ours. And two things came together: grant opportunities through the bipartisan infrastructure law, but also the acquisition of the KCS by the Canadian Pacific, and then the re-engagement of Amtrak. And we're working on all of that as we speak, and I expect that in the next month or two, you're going to receive some very positive news about the restoration of rail service.
Thank you, Rick. And in an address a few weeks ago at the Baton Rouge Press Club, you lamented the condition of the LSU library, saying the headline again, Edwards prefers library over PMAC. I don't know if you have to choose one or the other, but the library, of course, has been a source of concern, and justifiably so.
Yeah, and look, I am not against a refurbishment of the PMAC or whatever needs to be done there. I can't say that it's the same level of priority as the library, however, which is in abysmal condition. We had a world-renowned landscape architect who laid out LSU. There was never supposed to be a building in that place anyway, in that space. It needs to be returned to green space, a new, smaller, modern library that is more digital than books needs to be built, and it needs to have all of the features of a modern library, such as, the lounges and the coffee shop and that sort of stuff, to appeal to students. But also, we know that when parents come with students to look at a university, they will go to the library. and you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And that is not a good first impression for us to have at LSU, our flagship university, a land grant, space grant, sea grant institution. We have to do better.
And across campus, there's an $85 million rec center, which is state of the art. So if that can be done, I would think a library.
Yeah, and the rec center, I believe, was built with student fees.
It was.
And so there's always a difference in how things are funded. And by the way, most of the recent large expenditures on upgrades for athletic facilities have been done with private funds as well. But we need to improve the library there. And that's just the highest priority for me on that campus.
As we know, former president logged a lot of time here in 2019. How about the Trump Library at LSU? He hasn't decided where he's going to have his library.
Well, he logged a lot of time here because he was coming to campaign against me. So I suspect there's a better place for his library.
877-217-5757. Syed and Kenner. Syed, you're on Ask the Governor. Good afternoon.
I'm Syed. Good afternoon from Kenner, Louisiana. I have a quick question for you. Our homeowners insurance has gone up, extremely, and it is becoming unaffordable almost. So what is your plan, or what's your state trying to do for us to make it more affordable for all the residents of Louisiana?
Right. Homeowners insurance.
Yeah. So, Syed, thank you very much for the call. And this is one of the biggest challenges facing our state today, and it is the affordability of homeowners insurance, because without it, you can't obtain loans to build a house, and if you don't have it on a home that you own, then you may not be able to repair damage that is occasioned by a storm and so forth, and it affects all of us. So we have resurrected, if you will, the Insure Louisiana Incentive Fund. We put $45 million towards that fund, and it has to be matched dollar for dollar by insurance companies wanting grants, and so that becomes $90 million. And then the insurance companies have to write $2 for every $1 that is in the fund, so that becomes $180 million worth of insurance. And there were, I believe, 7 or 8 insurance companies willing to write additional policies through those grant dollars, and in fact oversubscribed the program by about $17 million. And so we're working with the legislature now to find the $17 million to put towards it to maximize the amount of new insurance that can be written. And of course, competition in the market does lower premiums. But we also need to depopulate the citizens' portfolio of policies. That's that insurer of last resort that is actually run by the state. So we've done that. The other thing that we're looking at that I think has the potential to make a big difference is move to a fortified roof standard, which is modeled after what took place years ago in Alabama with success. We know that in wind events and rain events, if you keep your roof intact, the amount of damage goes way down. And so by increasing the building codes, having a fortified roof, and then forcing insurers to take that into account and therefore lower premiums, that will really help homeowners in terms of a break on their premiums, but also making sure they don't have repetitive losses, or not just repetitive losses, but hopefully any major loss from a storm. But this is a challenging issue, and it's challenging, Syed, because we can be adversely affected in Louisiana even when we don't have a storm. That happened last year. We had the best hurricane season in 30 years. Not a single named storm came to Louisiana, but because Hurricane Ian ravaged Florida, insurance companies who were present in both our state and in Florida actually had to pay out a lot of claims. And so we lost additional insurers, not because of any exposure they had in Louisiana. And so it's tied to all of that. And then, of course, the increasing frequency and severity of storms, which I believe is driven by climate change. That affects this because it affects the cost of reinsurance. And reinsurance costs went up 100% overnight about 2 years ago when they realized that the models were wrong. and that the storms were happening with such frequency and severity that the damages were twice what they had predicted. And so anyway, it is a challenging problem. We do have things that we are doing, as I've just mentioned, and additional bills have been filed as well by the legislature that we're looking at. But I acknowledge that the affordability, I should say, of homeowners insurance is a real challenge.
We've got about a minute before we go to the halfway point of the show. And Governor, there's a lot of conjecture and concern about the debt ceiling. And most people in the know say that a collision may happen, but it won't be catastrophic and it'll be resolved quickly. But is there a concern about the impact in the state?
Yeah, well, first of all, the impact to the country. One of the things that we benefit tremendously as Americans is the stability of the dollar, and that undergirds the world economy. We don't ever want to lose that, and we have to make sure that we're paying our debts. Everybody on each side of this issue says we cannot and will not fail to pay our debts. So I believe this is going to be solved before we would go into default.
I'm your moderator, Jim Inkster, and for 86 months in a row, Governor John Bel Edwards is at your service. There's still a half hour to go if you'd like to give us a call. If you receive a busy signal, we should be able to get to you before the end of the show if you keep dialing, 877-217-5757. Let's go to George in Houma. George, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor. Hi, George.
Yeah, hello. Yes, Governor, I'm a fanboy, and I'm calling from Houma, Louisiana. I'm actually from Houston, but I haven't heard your show in a few months, and I didn't know if there are any updates on your plans after your term is over. Love to see you in Texas, but actually I think national stage is where I'd prefer to see you.
All right.
Well, George, thank you. You're very kind, and I appreciate your call. Donna and I are going to be moving back to North Tangipahoa Parish to our home in Roseland, and I will again practice law and look for other opportunities in the private sector as well. It has been a tremendous privilege for she and I to be the first lady and the governor of our state. We appreciate the votes of confidence that we got twice to do this job. It's been very challenging at times, but always rewarding. But at the end of the day, our expectation is to go back into the private sector and not really looking to get back into politics. But I don't say never because I don't know what the future is going to hold, both as it relates to me personally, but to this state that I love so much. And so I don't say never, but that's not my expectation.
Will you miss the mansion?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful place to live and to work because, I have an office there. And, Donna has done such a wonderful job there raising money privately in order to make improvements and make certain additions and so forth. So we certainly love living there. But it's also nice to have coffee on your own porch. And to wake up in your own bed, and so we do that when we go to Roseland, and that's nice as well.
And over the course of the last 7.5 years, you've attended many weddings and far too many funerals. That's a big part of the job, and I know you go to funerals of people who are close to people you know. Mm-hmm. Why is that so paramount as far as importance to you?
Well, look, I try to be supportive of my friends, and when I can, if I have a friend who's lost a loved one, even if I didn't really know that loved one too well myself, I want to be there to show support and to join them in prayer and that sort of stuff, whether it's a funeral mass or other funeral service. The other thing that I do routinely is make phone calls to people after they've experienced such a loss, especially if they're a state employee or something like that. But when I think about the funerals that I've been to, over the last 7 years, we've lost a number of former governors, and I've gone to all of their services, whether it was Governor Romer, Governor Edwards, Governor Blanco, Governor Foster, obviously you go to those. It's sort of part of your role as governor, but more than that, you have a real connection to those individuals and to their families, and you want to go and pay respect and when you do that, you're doing it on behalf of not just yourself, but on the behalf of the whole state. So I think those sorts of things are very important. And unlike the president, the vice president goes to a lot of funerals, right? It's something that I think I need to personally do when I can.
877-217-5757 for Governor John Bel Edwards. James on the North Shore. James, good afternoon.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the radio station and you, Governor, for having me on today. And I love what you say about the spiritualness of the Lord. I believe we don't use enough of his supernatural powers in prayer. And I thank you so much when you always ask us to come up and pray for things, because it does help. It absolutely helps. And thank you for that. And another thing I called in for today is a comment on the sales tax that they're trying to get rid of, the quarter-cent or half-cent sales tax.
Okay, so we added a penny in sales tax when I became governor, and we had a $2 billion deficit in order to, in a balanced way, through some strategic cuts, but also some revenue increases to balance the budget and fix our ship. The penny was reduced to 0.45 cents. So that's what we have in terms of an extra state sales tax. And I say extra, it's 0.45 cents more today than it was the day I became governor. In fiscal year 26, that sales tax goes away and will cause a loss in revenue of somewhere around $450 million. And so that's after the second legislative session of the next term. So the next legislature, the next governor, and that second session will be a fiscal session. We have worked very hard to grow and diversify the economy such that revenue loss would not create any sort of a fiscal cliff. And I can demonstrate our success to date by telling you that excess in the current year, so this is revenue that has come in the current fiscal year above what we had forecasted and what we had planned to spend, is today more than $900 million. The Revenue Estimating Conference meets tomorrow, and they're going to increase that number yet again. And so if current year excess is in an amount that exceeds the revenue loss when we lose the 0.45, I don't believe it's fair to say that there is a fiscal cliff. But what we know is there'll be plenty of opportunities to keep part or all of that should the legislature and the governor next term decide to do it.
877-217-5757. Still 20 minutes to go with the governor this hour, the 86th show of Ask the Governor. A bill, this so-called constitutional carry measure, has cleared a legislative committee. You vetoed a similar bill, maybe it was identical 2 years ago. Has anything changed?
My opinion has not changed. I think it's not good policy to allow anyone 18 and over to carry a concealed weapon without knowing that individual knows how to properly use the weapon, knows how to safely use the weapon, and has had a background check and so forth. And so I support the system that we currently have, and I think it would not be good policy. I also would point out I think the bill is improperly named, because if there's a constitutional right to conceal carry, you wouldn't need a statute in order to make it happen. You would simply go to court. Not even the Supreme Court we have today has ever held that there's a constitutional right to conceal carry.
Stuart in Baton Rouge. Stuart, you're on Ask the Governor.
Well, Jim, Governor, the audience, good afternoon. Governor, thank you as always. Governor, three quick things. There's a law in the book where seniors should be able to attend college for free. However, it's phantom only. Will you launch a campaign to make this happen? Secondly, how can a citizen email or reach you or someone very close to you? And thirdly, how about inviting a few of us little nobody Louisiana citizens to the mansion?
That was three things pretty quickly there. So my email address is pretty simple, jbe@la.gov. And I look at all the emails that I get. Secondly, inviting people to the mansion. I will let you know that there are tours very frequently and so forth. It is a state building and a public venue. It's also a residence, and so we have to keep that in check somewhat. But hopefully you will be able to come by and do a tour and so forth. And then with respect to seniors attending college for free, I think that may be the second time you raised that with me, Stuart. And I will have to be very honest with you, not something that I'm actually up on in terms of what the laws may state about seniors being able to go to.
Would seniors be eligible for TOPS?
Well, I don't know how they can qualify for TOPS if they didn't take the certain curriculum and the ACT and get a score. But I don't think he's talking about TOPS. I think he's talking about free, and I don't know whether that's tuition only or whether that's the fee component. But I am writing a note right now, and I'm going to get with the Commissioner of Higher Ed, Commissioner Kim Hunter-Reid, and figure out what that situation is, and if there's a benefit out there. Well, first off, when you say it's not really happening, if it's the law, I would assume it happens, but maybe there are just not a lot of seniors who are interested in taking advantage of it. But I will look into it.
This one is the afternoon program in 86 consecutive months at 2 p.m. every third Wednesday. The governor has been in the House, and next month it'll be the fourth Wednesday. But we're glad you're with us, and please, if you're so inclined, give us a call at 877-217-5757. Before we go to Kate in Baton Rouge, you had advocated on this show exceptions for rape and incest for abortion, and the lawmakers, in their wisdom, decided not to do it. Was that a disappointment?
Well, certainly it's disappointing. So I talked about it on this show, but I've talked about it in a number of different places, and I think most importantly at the State of the State to kick off the session. Look, I understand we're a pro-life state. I'm a pro-life governor, but I do believe that there ought to be room so that a rape victim or an incest victim isn't required by force of state law to carry that pregnancy to term if she believes that is not in her best interest, emotionally, physically, whatever. And that is especially the case when you have a very young victim who shouldn't do that, and the parents don't want her to have to do that, and their doctor believes it shouldn't have to happen. I don't think the state should be forcing that decision. And there are an awful lot of states out there, conservative pro-life states, who have rape and incest exceptions to their abortion bans and limitations. I think that's the best course for us. I do believe that an overwhelming majority of the people of Louisiana support that. And I would note it wasn't the legislature as a whole. It was the Administration of Criminal Law Committee. It was in the House of Representatives. So I think a grand total of 15 legislators out of 144 have weighed in on that. And I'm disappointed because I believe that those exceptions are warranted and needed in order to strike the right balance.
Last week, on a 67-28 vote, the Louisiana House approved a bill to broadly ban discussions of sexuality and gender in classrooms and extracurricular activities. This one is the so-called Don't Say Gay bill. Your thoughts?
Well, I really wish that our legislature would focus on things that grow the economy, get people employed, fix our infrastructure, address our critical needs, homeowners insurance and other things, and rather than doing that, sometimes they just feel obligated to introduce bills into the legislature here that follows some sort of a national playbook. I don't believe we have any issues of the type that are at issue in that bill that need to be addressed here in Louisiana. I think it's unfortunate. And then, of course, you just got to wait and see how it might be amended and so forth. If it comes to my desk, what it actually says at that particular point in time. But I think it's unfortunate. I really do. So for example, when the U.S. Supreme Court decided that there was a constitutional right for same-sex couples to marry, are teachers going to be able to cover that? Or are teachers going to be scared to cover it because they might get in trouble? They might lose their job. It's history. It's factual. That's what happened. Mm-hmm. Are they going to be able to cover it? It probably causes many more problems than it solves, because it solves exactly none.
877-217-5757 for Governor Edwards. Kate in Baton Rouge. Kate, you're on.
Governor.
Hi. Yes, ma'am.
You reformed the industrial tax exemption program in your first term. What would you like to hear from the candidates running to replace you on this matter?
Well, first of all, Kate, thank you so much. And I think sometimes the word reform is overused, because anybody who wants to make a change to anything, they're saying they reformed it, and that they're proposing a reform. But with respect to ITEP, I think it's absolutely spot on. We improved the ITEP program because it functioned as a 100% exemption on property taxes for 10 years. And even though every dollar exempted would go to local government had no say in whether the exemption was going to be granted. It wasn't tied to jobs. And so we made a few changes. We changed it to no more than an 80% exemption, which means that 20% of the value is taxed in year one before the property is depreciated. And that has produced hundreds of millions of dollars for local government to be able to use to educate children, to provide fire and police services, to do roads and bridges, and you name it. Secondly, the locals have the option to say whether they want the exemption to be granted, and then it is tied to jobs created, or a strong case for jobs being retained. So I want the candidates for governor to say that they will keep those changes in law, because it didn't just produce more money for local government. It's just fairer. Not a single state dollar is at issue. The state shouldn't decide that issue for locals. But the second thing, Kate, that people need to understand is, because the people who were against the change, Lobby and some others, said I was going to kill the program. The total capital investments in Louisiana on an annual basis since I made the changes that qualify for the ITEP exemption are twice what they were before I made the changes. So we didn't kill the program, we doubled the program. We just made it better. And so any candidate running for governor ought to be made to say squarely on the record, will you keep those changes? And if they say no, I encourage the people of Louisiana to cross that candidate off their list of someone who would be acceptable to them. And by the way, they should do the same thing on the Medicaid expansion.
Michael in Baton Rouge. Michael, you're on. Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, Governor, I'm concerned about the carbon sequestration that's happening in Lake Mirapaw. And since that's state land and everything, are we writing contracts with Airgas and these other companies that they're going to be responsible for cleaning up whatever problems that are left there over the years? I'm looking at what we're doing as far as the orphan oil wells around the state, and it's the taxpayer who's picking up that tab.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for calling, Michael. On the orphan oil wells, real quickly, in the first 4 months of this year, we have plugged 260 of them, and we typically only get to 160 over the course of a year, and we're doing those who emit the most fugitive methane gas So that's a plus for us, and that $25 million that we're using came from the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we're making the case for more money because we actually have about 4,600 such wells. With respect to carbon capture and sequestration, I think you know that it is something that I support. I believe we've got to address climate change. We have to reduce our carbon emissions, and this is a technology that is fully mature. I believe the science is sound. I believe it is safe, and we are not currently sequestering carbon in Louisiana, but hopefully in the near future, we will sequester carbon permanently and safely in geologic formations under the earth that are capable of doing so. And that doesn't happen yet. The only thing we're doing now is the Class 5 wells to try to figure out, are those geologic formations capable of safely and permanently sequestering CO2? But I do expect, and I don't know whether the project that you just mentioned will happen or not, because it depends on how the Class 5 wells go. But I do expect in the future that there will be carbon capture and sequestration in Louisiana. But I can tell you that any negotiations would require, or contract, I should say, with an entity that is going to do carbon capture and sequestration will require them to address any issues that are caused by it. But I just want to let you know, this is not some new technology that's never been done. It's been happening for decades in other parts of the country and really in other parts of the world as well. And of course, we have a lot of experience in Louisiana with drilling wells, both to extract minerals, but also for injection purposes. And so this is something that I believe we need to do to reduce our carbon emissions and do our part to address climate change.
Just have a minute to go, but with the debt ceiling under review and perhaps a collision on the way, how close are you to members of the delegation, the congressional delegation, considering that only one is a Democrat?
No, well, that's true, but I have a very good working relationship with our delegation, and have visited with them and called upon them by letter, by phone call, in person, multiple times over the course of the year on a wide range of issues. Certainly, anytime we need help to recover from hurricanes and so forth, but when it comes to offshore revenue sharing, to make sure that there's a vehicle to share revenue created by wind offshore, for example, in a whole range of issues. And so, I'm one of those people that really understand there's a difference between maybe a personal disagreement or political disagreement, but I get past that in order to work with people for the benefit of the state.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you very much.